and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel Wales and let me take you along today to Newcastle United versus Brighton and Hove Albion in the Premier League. This is Newcastle's penultimate home game of the season. And of course, against this Brighton side who are in very good form, going for Europe at the moment. Newcastle probably should be in the similar vein, but they're not, you know. But with 4 games to go, Newcastle could get into Europe. They could also equally get dragged into a relegation fight. So we'll see how all that goes. Today, I think Newcastle, they need to win, to be honest with you. Certainly, given just how poor things have been of late. There was, of course, a bit of a performance response against Arsenal last week. But, again, obviously when you're playing Arsenal, you know, a performance response isn't necessarily always going to be good enough. Newcastle did lose that game 1-0. So what do we think today? Well, Joelinton returns to Newcastle's squad following his 2-match suspension for bookings, or the amount of bookings. Then, of course, you've got Anthony Gordon, who could indeed be in contention to return to the matchday squad as well, after he's been missing the last couple of games with a hip injury. So, what do we think? Well, you could see a world where both come straight back into the team, not just the squad. Joelinton, I think, may well do, but we shall see. Gordon depends, you know, how well he's trained over the last few days. Sorry about those bumps there on this road. They are absolutely terrible, the potholes. Absolutely awful. But yeah, with Joelinton, as I say, I think he could definitely come straight back in, depending on, of course, whether Howe decides to play Ramsey or Willock, because Willock did play well against Arsenal, it's fair to say. But Joelinton obviously provides something a bit different, but we shall see. Gordon, as I say, it does depend on how well he's trained in the week, I tend to think, in that regard, in terms of how, not necessarily performance levels, but just how he's felt, because he's only just come back in to the training fold. So that's a dilemma in itself. I think Lewis Miley will continue at right back, because at the minute he probably is the club's best right back. Obviously Kieran Trippier is, well, he's probably the second best right back, and obviously he's leaving at the end of the season. Tino Livramento is injured, but even when he wasn't injured, he was really playing quite poorly, to be brutally honest. So I don't think he would have started anyway. I think Lewis Miley will come in and stay. Well, he can say he came in against Arsenal and played right back there, and I think he'll continue there. And then the rest of the back four is probably going to be similar, to be honest. I think that Chow and Botman will continue their partnership in the middle. And then, does Eddie Howe keep Dan Burn at left back? He seemed to suggest that a little bit in his pre-match press conference yesterday. I don't know, but I get the sneaky feeling that Burn might still be in the team come Q2 when the teams are announced. But you never know. He might suddenly bring Lewis Hall back in. I'd like to see Lewis Hall come back in, but not entirely sure. Then you've got Brighton, and as I said before, Brighton are, well, just a really good team at the moment, aren't they? Really, really very good. I think they've gone under the radar a little bit, to be brutally honest, in terms of just how consistent they've been throughout the season. You know, are they sat 6th at the moment, if my memory serves right in terms of looking at the table? Which could, if Aston Villa were to win the Europa League and finish in the top 5, would be a Champions League spot for Brighton. Of course, those things have to happen first, but there's potential, and even then, if it wasn't Champions League spot, it would be a Europa League spot. And Brighton have been in the Europa League before, but again, it would be a quite remarkable season if they were to do it this time. And that's the thing with Newcastle. They just need to not have been really poor over the last few weeks, and they would have been right in the mix. Obviously, Bruno's injury, we know, didn't help at all. In fact, it was hugely detrimental. But they just needed to be sort of how they were from September to February, consistently inconsistent, and they probably would have had at least 5 or 6 more points. You know, with all the points that they've dropped from winning positions, certainly they could have had a few more. And that's sort of the tail of the season, isn't it? Newcastle could be in a much better position, but they aren't. But with 4 games to go, they still could, and I say this very cautiously, could sneak into some form of European competition, because those European places could go down as far as 8th. Maybe, I don't know what the permutations are exactly. I think 8th, certainly, depending on who wins the FA Cup as well. Maybe 9th, who knows, but 8th I think is where you want to be. And that's it's still within the realms of possibility. But then again, so is 18th. So, yeah. And then, of course, you've got the issue of the Maffin Hall Summit, and then you've got Eddie Howe's future and what the summer's going to look like and all those things. But I think for now it's best we just focus on the football. Brighton coming here, as I say, in good form, looking for Europe. They've got a striker in Danny Welbeck who arguably could be in contention to go to the World Cup. I don't think he will, but it's certainly worth a shout at least. You know, how much better off would Newcastle be if they had Danny Welbeck starting for them? There's a question. But anyway, we're now on our way to St James's Park. It is about 10 to 1 at the moment. Sorry, no, it's 20 to 1. I tell a lie. And we should get there hopefully just after 1 o'clock, 2 hours prior to kick-off. And we will get sorted and set up ahead of the match starting. So, do join me for the rest of the day as we watch Newcastle United against Brighton. 3-1 to Newcastle United. And just behind me there, if you look in the distance, there are the Geordie Journos. Up to their post-match vlogging antics. Do give them a subscribe, of course, if you are watching. What did I think of that? Well, Newcastle made hard work of it. There's no denying that. They made hard work of that win, but that feeling at the end, I think, for Eddie Howe, that will have tasted so sweet. You could see the relief on his face as he was swamped by a lot of his coaching stuff. Now, I'll get into a bit more depth in the car, exactly what I thought, but I think just in terms of just bottling that emotion, Eddie Howe needed that so much. But yes, 3-1 it finished. Newcastle, finally, back to winning ways. As I was saying then, 3-1 to Newcastle. Obviously, I've already spoken about the emotion that encapsulated the whole stadium, the relief for Eddie Howe, of course, as well. But I'd like to talk about what happened afterwards. For one, Eddie Howe says he'll sleep tonight, which, you know, fair enough. He also said that he had woken up last night with anxiety, just hoping that his players delivered a good performance. I thought that was really telling, actually, because, you know, he also, to be fair to him, he did say that's not the first time he's had anxiety with regard to Newcastle and worry, but it did feel big. I mean, I said it felt big against Bournemouth a couple of weeks ago, but it once again, because they didn't win that, and obviously they didn't win against Arsenal, it felt big again today, and finally they've delivered. And I know at 1:45, when the team dropped, I obviously wondered whether Gordon would be in, Joe Linton, etc. Joe Linton was. Gordon actually didn't play today. He was in the squad but didn't get on the pitch. There was a lot of groans in social media. You know, Dan Burns still at left back, Voltemada not playing, Wissa not playing, Osula still through the middle, Willock on the left, Murphy on the right. There was, as I say, there was still some discontent at the team selection. And yeah, when we got into the ground and the game was on, I mean, it helped that Newcastle were leading sort of 2-0 within the first half, but there was audible Eddie Howe's black and white army from the strawberry corner in the second half. It went around the whole ground when the team really needed it a bit as well. And I thought that was really telling, that yes, those groans on social media, and you know, I think it's important that we do, in this situation that Newcastle find themselves in, is that people do understand that there is definitely a split okay, maybe split maybe isn't the right word, but there is definitely a difference between what's been said online and what's actually happening inside of St James's Park. Now, some probably won't like to hear that, but it's true. There was definite vocal support for Newcastle and for Eddie Howe in the ground today. It could be heard all over. Now, yes, Newcastle, they were decent in the first half. They were not so good in the second, but a win is a win. And Eddie Howe, you know, as much as I probably would have wanted Lewis Hall to start, Dan Burn did score, so, you know, fair enough. Will Osula scored. So, yes, Newcastle probably do need to start looking to the future in terms of who will be their players that are part of this group. You know, Lewis Hall should be the starting left back for the foreseeable, but what I will say about Eddie Howe is he picked a team today that won them the match. And the subs he also brought on, you know, Lewis Hall did come on, Harry Barnes came on, scored, Wissa came on, should have scored. So, and Eddie Howe was actually asked about this at full time as well. And you know, it's something that I think is interesting because there was, as I said, you know, there'd been groans and issues, but there was support in the stadium and the team he picked won the game, and I think that's very much important to remember. I asked him about Will Osula. I asked him about Osula's development and whether he'd like Osula to stay at the club next season. He said he definitely would like Osula to stay at the club next season, which is interesting because, of course, reports suggest that Newcastle are indeed in the market for another striker in the summer. So what does that mean for Johan Wissa, for Nick Voltemade? Does one of them go? Maybe that is the case. We shall see. Certainly Wissa got on today, Voltemade didn't. Osula, Howe said, you know, has been developed a lot. There's been a lot of work put into his development from the likes of Graham Jones and Jason Tyndall over the period he's been at Newcastle. And that is starting to bear fruit to an extent. I'm not saying Osula will ever be the finished product. He might never be that, but certainly at the moment, you know, he's scored, what is it 3 goals in his last 4 games for Newcastle? And he does seem to be the one who fits the system best at the moment. And then you can have gripe about the system itself. Okay, that's fair enough, you know, and maybe that system will change next season. But right at the moment, Osula is doing all right. And Eddie Howe agreed with that. He said he played well. So yeah, that's another interesting one, I thought. So where does this leave Newcastle then? Well, they're not going to go get relegated. Any fears of that can be, you know, allayed. I know it's still not mathematically certain, but Tottenham will have to go to Aston Villa and win. A draw would mean Newcastle are safe, and I know that sounds bad, me saying it. I'd say, oh, Newcastle are safe given everything, but they've also, and I say this cautiously because it still is a sort of a far-flung potential. There is still potential of Europe, and people may mock me for saying that in the comments, because of course, you know, today wasn't perfect by any stretch in terms of performance, but we shall see. They'll have to go to Forest and win as well, will Newcastle, and then they might, you know, depending on the results, maybe they will keep themselves in the mix. But they'll have to win the remainder of their games, and given just how poor they've been of late, that does seem far-fetched. But they did win today. Maybe they'll go and win next Sunday against Forest. Maybe they will. We don't know that. Equally, they could easily go and get beaten against Forest. A Forest side who, by the way, are in great form at the moment. Obviously winning in Europe in midweek against Villa in the first leg of the Europa League semi-final, and beating Sunderland prior to that 5-0 the Friday previous to that. So yeah, Forest in good form. But will they have one, you know, if they do get to the Europa League final, will they have one eye on that? Maybe they will. Of course, they're not mathematically safe either. So you could argue that actually they'll probably still have plenty of eyes in the Premier League, and given the final of the Europa League was to be another couple of weeks after that. I don't know exactly what the day it is, but they'll probably think if they win this weekend, actually, to be fair, if they get something against Chelsea, I think it's on Monday, they'll probably see themselves as alright. and then we'll be looking ahead to obviously the midweek games as well. There's a lot of permutations. I'm perhaps going a bit pie in the sky here, but I think the crux of today is that Eddie Howe got the team selection right to win the match. At the same time, you could argue it has just papered over some cracks. That's fair enough. But regardless of the situation, regardless of your viewpoint on Eddie Howe, today was needed for everyone associated with Newcastle United. It was just that win, that final whistle. It just was such a release of tension from everyone, or for everyone in that ground. Eddie Howe especially, obviously, and you know, team selection, call what you will, but I won them the game. Eddie Howe will sleep tonight. Yes, he will. And they'll go to Forest next week with some renewed confidence. So yeah, that is where Newcastle United are now at this point. You know what, even if they don't win the last few games of the season, I think people will now be happy to draw a line under this season. I'd imagine that Eddie Howe will be Newcastle United manager or head coach next season. So with that being said, they've got that something to cling on to now, to sort of latch onto, I should probably say instead, in terms of the end of this season. It could yet get better, we don't know, but if not, then the season has to be just put to one side and pushed to the back, and then move swiftly on to the summer, whatever that may bring in terms of incomings, and looking ahead to next season. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching this vlog on my channel. Do appreciate everyone. As I say, you saw the Geordie journos in the background before. Give them a subscribe. But yeah, thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you next time. Probably, I should imagine, at the Stadium of Light. Or maybe even Middlesbrough. We'll see, depending on what the situation is with that. I mean, I know after that playoff game is over to Southampton, so it depends on which one I go to for Middlesbrough or for Sunderland next weekend, because it could be interesting. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.